Commander Ethan Cole didn't believe in miracles. He believed in data, hard, cold facts, the kind that didn't lie. And right now, the numbers flashing on his screen were lying. A distress beacon, not just any beacon, a 300-year-old meridian signal, and it was coming from inside the Leviathan. He clenched his jaw as he ran the calculations again. A gas giant's atmosphere was a death sentence. The gravity alone could crush warships into debris, and the storms, violent enough to rip through planetary crusts. There was no logical reason why a signal should still exist down there. And yet, the screen showed a pulse. Weak, faint, but still there. He barely had time to process before the automated response from the Galactic Council came through his comms, cold and indifferent. Disregard, no possibility of survivors, signal classified as historical data drift. His teeth ground together. He wasn't stupid. He knew the odds. He knew what happened to anything that got pulled too deep into a gas giant's gravity well. But something about this felt wrong. If there were no survivors, then why was the signal still broadcasting? He tapped his console, sending the information to the one person who might listen. Captain Rylan Voss hated council meetings. The bureaucrats were already talking over each other when he stepped inside the chamber, the live projection of Ethan Cole's findings floating above the central display. He didn't even need to hear the full debate to know what was coming. The Leviathan is impenetrable. No known vessel can survive descent beyond the first layer. The Meridians have been extinct for centuries. Voss had heard every excuse in the book. But that didn't change the fact that a signal was still active. He straightened, his voice cutting through the noise. Then explain the beacon. Silence. They had no explanation. The council's lead speaker sighed, leaning forward with an exasperated expression. Even if there were survivors, which we highly doubt, there is no feasible way to retrieve them. We do not sanction reckless missions, Captain Voss. There it was. Dismissal. Voss kept his voice even. You don't have to sanction anything. The UNRS Dauntless is running independent operations this cycle. We'll investigate on our own. The lead speaker scoffed. And when your ship is torn apart by the Leviathan's gravity well, we'll be expected to answer for it. Voss gave him a thin smile. You won't have to answer for anything. We'll be too dead to file a complaint. The Dauntless wasn't a warship. She was a rescue vessel, built for the kind of high-risk recoveries that most fleets wouldn't even attempt. Every inch of her hull was reinforced, her engines fine-tuned for maneuvering through gravitational chaos. But even with all her upgrades, this mission was beyond insane. Voss stood on the bridge, watching the planet loom like a swirling titan in the view screen. The Leviathan wasn't just big. It was monstrous, its atmosphere churning with storms the size of continents. The signal pulsed again, closer than before. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Arden, adjusted the readouts. We're looking at 50,000 kilometers down before we even hit the signal origin point. Voss whistled low. Deep. Too deep, Arden muttered. Cole's voice came over the comms from the data center. I've been running trajectory simulations. Whatever's down there, if it's still intact, it's got shielding we don't understand. That's the only way it hasn't been crushed. Voss tapped his fingers on the console, thinking. Any guesses on what that shielding is running on? Best guess? Something that won't last much longer. We're seeing serious degradation in the energy signatures. That settled it. Then we don't have time to argue about risks. Arden exhaled sharply. Sir, even if we get through the upper layers, we have no idea what kind of turbulence. Then we'll improvise. That's not a plan. No, but it's a damn good strategy. The comm station lit up with incoming transmissions, ships from other human fleets, all listening in on their unsanctioned mission. One by one, their messages came in. UNRS Reliant, standing by. UNRS Pioneer, requesting flight data. UNRS Horizon, adjusting course to follow your lead. Voss felt a slow grin spread across his face. They weren't going in alone. The Dauntless thrusters fired, and the fleet of human rescue ships began their descent. They were going to save the lost Meridians, or they were going to die trying. Humanity has chosen to do the impossible. They are going into the Leviathan. The rescue mission has begun. The Dauntless shuddered as it crossed the upper atmosphere, the pressure rippling across the hull like a living thing. The storm layers churned ahead, an ocean of shifting colors, deep crimson clouds colliding with streaks of electric blue. The Leviathan's gravity wasn't just heavy, it was alive, unpredictable, and trying to pull them apart. Captain Ryland Voss stood at the command station, feet planted, expression calm. Status? Lieutenant Arden's hands moved swiftly across the controls. Hull integrity at 94%, shields holding, but the drag is... The ship lurched violently, throwing unsecured crew members into their restraints. Arden gritted his teeth. Correction. Shields are struggling. Voss didn't react. This was expected. Adjust compensation fields by 3%. Keep us aligned with the fleet. The comm station crackled as reports from the other human ships flooded in. Reliant here. Turbulence is worse than expected. Pioneer. Adjusting vector. Gravity pockets are forming fast. Dauntless, do you copy? We're losing visibility. Voss turned to the helm officer. Steady. Keep our descent controlled. We knew this was coming. Outside, the Leviathan raged. It wasn't just a storm. It was a gauntlet of forces that could snap metal like twigs, and they were going straight into its heart. The signal was getting stronger. Ethan Cole sat hunched over his console, his fingers flying across the interface as he ran another deep scan. We're close, he muttered. Another 20,000 kilometers, give or take. Arden paled. You mean another 20,000 kilometers of crushing gravity? Cole didn't look up. That's the one. The Leviathan wasn't just a killer of ships, it was a graveyard. Long-range sensors had already picked up debris fields of ancient wrecks, ships that had tried, and failed, to escape. The Meridians hadn't been alone in their descent, and none had survived. Cole's screen pulsed. There! A faint energy signature, buried beneath the storm layers. That's it. That's their city. Voss leaned in, eyes narrowing at the data stream. How many? Cole hesitated. Then, 50,000 life signs. The bridge fell silent. Arden was the first to speak. You mean 50,000 bodies? No, Cole said. They're still alive. The weight of that realization hit everyone. 3 centuries. 3 centuries of silence. And now, 50,000 Meridians waiting to be saved. The descent became a race against time. The deeper they went, the worse the Leviathan fought back. The fleet adjusted their formations, moving in tight synchronization, keeping their shields overlapped. The only way they were making it out of this alive was together. The storm grew violent. Lightning crackled through the clouds, plasma discharges ripping through the sky like cosmic whips. One bolt struck the Pioneer, sending it into a violent spin before stabilizers kicked in. We're fine, their captain gasped over comms, but let's not do that again. Cole's voice remained steady. We've got minutes before those energy fields collapse. If we're getting them out, it has to be now. Voss exhaled slowly. Then we don't stop moving. The Dauntless dived. The Meridian city came into view through the storm. A vast metallic construct, its ancient shielding flickering as it strained against the Leviathan's wrath. Voss didn't hesitate. Begin evacuation procedures. We pull them all out. Shuttles launched from the human fleet, weaving through the atmosphere as storm winds threatened to tear them apart. Docking clamps engaged, locking onto Meridian platforms as doors hissed open. The first survivors stepped forward. They were thin, pale, their eyes filled with something between awe and disbelief. For 300 years they had been waiting, and now humanity had come for them. The city has been found. The Meridians are alive, but the Leviathan is far from finished. The hardest part isn't finding them. It's getting them out. The Dauntless held position above the flickering energy shield, its reinforced hull groaning against the turbulence. Shuttles swarmed below, their engines flaring as they maneuvered through the unstable atmosphere, locking onto platforms and docking rings across the massive Meridian city. Voss didn't waste time. "Move fast, move smart," he ordered over comms. "We don't get a second chance at this." The first Meridian survivors were already boarding the shuttles, staggering, disoriented, their bodies weak from centuries of stasis. But the rescue wasn't moving fast enough. Cole's voice crackled through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Captain, the outer shielding is losing integrity. If it fails before we get them all out..." Voss finished the thought himself. "They'll be crushed by the Leviathan's gravity. No second chances. Get me an ETA on shield collapse." "Best estimate?" 15 minutes. That wasn't enough time. Inside the city, the Meridians were struggling. They had been asleep for 3 centuries. Their bodies were frail, their balance weak. Medics from the Dauntless crew were already on the ground, administering stabilization treatments, helping them walk. But the shuttles could only hold so many at a time, and the storm was getting worse. Lieutenant Arden's voice came through the ship's comms. "Captain, we've got lightning discharges building in the lower atmosphere. If they arc into our ships..." Voss gritted his teeth. He already knew. One direct hit could send an entire rescue shuttle plummeting into the depths. "Then we reinforce the gravity corridor." Cole hesitated. "Captain, if we push the field generators beyond capacity, we don't have another choice." The fleet was already running on borrowed time. Voss tapped into the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, reinforce gravity dampeners. We hold this corridor open until the last Meridian is out." A chorus of confirmations echoed back. No hesitation, no retreat. They were all in. The evacuation accelerated. Shuttles landed and launched in rapid succession, pushing their engines to the limit. Crews worked faster, carrying the weakest Meridians aboard, strapping them in before taking off again. But the Leviathan wasn't letting them go easily. Lightning tore through the sky. One bolt struck the Reliant, frying its stabilizers and sending it into a downward spiral. For half a second, the bridge of the Dauntless went silent. Then, through sheer piloting skill, or pure luck, the Reliant recovered, its thrusters firing hard as it pulled away from the storm. "We're good," their captain called out over comms. "But let's not make a habit of that." Voss exhaled slowly. That had been too close, and there were still thousands left to evacuate. A new alert flashed across the bridge. The outer energy field was failing. Cole's voice was sharp. "Captain, we're looking at total collapse in 4 minutes." Not enough time. They needed a faster way. Voss's mind raced. The shuttles weren't fast enough. The docking process took too long. Then it hit him. "What if we don't dock?" Arden turned sharply. "Sir?" "If we can extend the Dauntless's artificial gravity field, we don't need to land shuttles. We pull them up directly." Cole cursed under his breath. "That's insane." "Does it work?" A long pause. Then Cole sighed. "Technically, yes." That was good enough. Then make it happen. The final phase of the rescue began. The Dauntless activated a wide-range gravity tether, a desperate experimental maneuver that pulled entire groups of Meridians off the platforms and into the ships hovering above. It was messy, dangerous, but it was working. Hundreds at a time were lifted into the waiting vessels. Voss watched the numbers. They were close. "Come on, come on." Cole's voice came through. "That's the last of them." Relief crashed through Voss for exactly 3 seconds. Then the Leviathan roared. The energy field collapsed completely, and the station started falling. The Meridians have been evacuated, but now the city is falling, and the fleet is still inside the Leviathan. The hardest part of the rescue isn't over yet. The moment the Meridian city's energy field collapsed, everything changed. The Dauntless shook violently, the pressure shift slamming through the ship's reinforced hull like a battering ram. The once stabilized gravity corridor fractured, sending shockwaves through the storm. The fleet was still inside, and now the Leviathan was pulling them down. Voss grabbed onto the nearest console as the ship lurched hard to port. "Cole!" he barked over the comms. "Already on it!" Cole's voice was sharp. "We've lost our stable field. If we don't re-establish a controlled ascent, we're going to be part of this planet's core in the next 60 seconds. Voss didn't need the reminder. The Leviathan's gravitational forces were increasing. With the station's stabilizers offline, they were now in free fall. Arden's hands flew across his console, his voice clipped. All fleet vessels reporting extreme turbulence. Reliant and Pioneer are trying to break free, but... A plasma arc discharge ripped through the clouds. For a split second, the entire fleet was illuminated in blinding light. Then, a shockwave slammed into the Pioneer, sending it into a violent tailspin. Pioneer is going down. Voss acted without thinking. Reroute power to gravity dampeners. Redirect all auxiliary thrusters to stabilize them. The Dauntless engines roared, pushing beyond safety limits as they extended an emergency tether. The Pioneer's thrusters flared, their ship jerking upward as the tether locked on. For a terrifying moment, it didn't work. Then, the spin slowed. The Pioneer leveled out, engines flaring as it fought for control. "We're stable," their captain gasped, "but we won't be for long if we don't get out of here." Voss knew that. They all knew that. "Cole, give me a way out." A pause. Then, "We can't break through the storm wall at this angle. We need to use the planet's rotation to slingshot around the upper jet streams." Arden's eyes widened. "That'll put us in the middle of the most unstable pressure zones." "Yeah," Cole said flatly. "But if we time it right, we ride the sheer force of the jet streams and slingshot out before they tear us apart." It was insane. It was stupid. It was the only chance they had. Voss didn't hesitate. "Do it." The Dauntless angled hard, adjusting its trajectory as the fleet followed suit. The storm raged ahead, a swirling abyss of pressure and plasma discharges. The gravity distortions were growing stronger. If they miscalculated, they'd be crushed in seconds. "All ships, hold formation," Voss ordered. "This is going to be rough." The ship shuddered as the first jet stream caught them. The Leviathan fought back, its winds screaming, its atmosphere trying to drag them back down. And then, the slingshot took hold. Everything accelerated. The fleet shot forward, propelled by the planet's own rotational forces. The view screens blurred with violent motion, gravity dampeners struggling against the forces tearing at them. Voss gritted his teeth as the thrusters burned at full capacity. "Almost there," Arden shouted. Then, a shockwave erupted behind them. The Meridian City, its stabilizers completely failing, collapsed into the abyss below. The gravitational surge slammed into the fleet, a final attempt to pull them down. The Dauntless bucked violently, warning alarms flashing red. They weren't going to make it. Voss knew it, so he did the only thing left. "Divert all power to forward thrusters," Cole cursed. "That'll overload the core." "I know. Do it." The ship rocketed forward, pushing past its structural limits. The hull groaned, metal straining, but the Leviathan's grip weakened. The fleet burst through the storm wall. For half a second, the sky turned white. Then, they were free. The Dauntless broke through the clouds, its hull steaming from the pressure shift. The rest of the fleet followed, engines flickering but intact. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, cheering erupted across the comms. They had done it. They had survived the Leviathan. And more importantly, so had every last Meridian. The Galactic Council was waiting when they docked at the nearest orbital station. Voss had expected anger, backlash, consequences. He hadn't expected silence. The council chamber was tense, filled with representatives from over a dozen species. The Zixathi, the most vocal critics of humanity's recklessness, stood near the center. Their lead delegate spoke first. 50,000 lives rescued from certain death. Voss remained still. You defied direct orders, risked not just your crew, but an entire fleet. The Zixathi's sharp gaze flickered, and yet you succeeded. The words hung in the air, The Galactic Council had spent decades dismissing humanity as reckless, unpredictable. And now, they were forced to reconsider. The Zixathi delegate studied him carefully before speaking again. Humans do not back down, even when all logic dictates they should. A pause. Perhaps that is not a weakness. Voss allowed himself a small smile. It never was. The Meridians are safe, the Leviathan has been escaped, and now humanity's reputation will never be the same. The aftermath of the Leviathan rescue rippled across the stars. News spread faster than official statements could suppress it. The entire galaxy watched the footage, human ships descending into a gas giant, defying every known limit of physics to pull 50,000 lost souls from a 3-century-old grave. The Galactic Council had written the Meridians off as dead, but humanity had saved them anyway. And now, the Council had to answer for it. Captain Rylan Voss stood at the center of the Council chamber, his uniform still marked with the heat scoring from the Leviathan's storms. The Dauntless's crew stood behind him, a wall of silent defiance. Across the chamber, representatives from the most powerful species in the galaxy watched with unreadable expressions. The Zixathi delegate, once one of humanity's fiercest critics, was the first to speak. 50,000 lives. The weight of the words hung in the air. The Galactic Council deemed their survival impossible. He let that settle. Humans did not agree. Voss held his ground. This wasn't a trial. This was something else. The Council had been proven wrong, and now they had to redefine what humanity meant to them. One of the more rigid species, the Vailari, folded his claws, his voice clipped. You ignored orders. You risked your entire fleet. If your mission had failed, humanity would have been blamed for reckless endangerment. Voss tilted his head. And if we had stood by and done nothing, what would you have called that? The Vailari hesitated. No answer. Because there wasn't one. The truth was simple. The Galactic Council had deemed the rescue impossible, but humanity had made it possible anyway. The Zixathi delegate leaned forward. Your kind does not fear the impossible. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Voss met his gaze. We don't believe in impossible. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Zixathi gave a slow, deliberate nod. Perhaps that is why you survive where others do not. When the council adjourned, Voss stepped onto the orbital station's balcony, overlooking the docking bay where the rescued Meridians were being processed and treated. Ethan Cole leaned beside him, arms crossed. So, what's the verdict? Voss exhaled. They won't admit they were wrong, but they know. Cole smirked. That's good enough for me. In the docking bay, a Meridian child was staring up at the Dauntless, her wide eyes filled with wonder. She reached out, pressing a hand against the reinforced hull. Voss watched in silence. This was why they did it. Not for politics, not for recognition, but because no one deserved to be left behind. As the Dauntless prepared to depart, the final transmission from the Council arrived. It was short, but it said everything. Humanity is reckless, unpredictable, dangerous. A pause. And when the universe is at its worst, you are the ones who answer the call. Humanity has redefined its place in the galaxy. They don't just take risks, they change the definition of impossible.